Howdy ho. This is one of the first 4 videos that I'm uploading to my channel. This is a coffee table that I built actually for myself and I still use. It's not the most complex one, but it's one of the very first things I have ever built, and this one I did at the same time than the similar table with birch and white epoxy. For this one I was using walnut. When I started building this, I didn't have a workshop, so I built everything outside, and it was already quite cold, as you can see from my clothing. The work started with cleaning up the edges so that I can seal the slabs and do the epoxy pour. I worked with very basic tools at this point. Some of the footage is shot with my mobile phone standing on a cardboard box, so I didn't have any fancy camera equipment either, but they did the job. Here you see me just sealing the slabs before doing the actual pour. After a few days it was ready for roughening up the edge so that the epoxy will have a proper surface to attach onto. I was building the white birch coffee table at the same time, and you can see that I have 2 molds on the floor. For both of these tables I used the same mold, release, but if you watch the other video you can see the way they came off from the mold were very different. This one was quite easy to get out, but I really struggled with the other table. I still don't know why that happened, but a similar problem happened with my dining table build. Depending when you watch this video, that build is actually going to be on the channel as well, or has already been uploaded. In future builds I will be using epoxy tape actually to try it out. For calculating the amount of epoxy needed, I'm using instructions gained from Blacktail Studios epoxy workshop, so I won't go into detail how this works. If you want proper instructions, I strongly recommend watching Cam's videos and or buying access to the full online workshop he provides. And I am bad at math, and this method is perfect for me. It has worked very well on my 3 resin tables that I've built to date. So when mixing the epoxy, I trust the more experienced woodworkers and mix at least for 3 minutes. Dropping the plastic collar into the bucket is not recommended like I did. I've used my very special method on how to mix for 3 to 4 minutes by selecting a very good death metal song from Arch Enemy. I'm on a marathon, some of the bands I like, while mixing it up, so that works. The theme on this video seems to be me dropping things. This will be the second one here, and if you wait for it you will see a third one later on. Anyway, I didn't know how much of this color to put in, so I probably used way too much, but at least the end result was very black like I wanted. I like watching this color to spread slowly to the epoxy. Obviously I mixed it properly, and then it was time to use the torch to pop up the bubbles. If you watch closely you can see that I have white epoxy in another bucket, so I actually did 2 pours at the same time. Never again. That became a bit too much to mix, organize and film at the same time in a very small space that I had back then. So after having fun with the torch, it was time for doing the actual pour. My floor wasn't completely level, and while doing 2 pours at the same time I didn't film everything, but I needed to shim the molds a bit to get them almost level. Eventually I got the mold somewhat level, and the pour was pretty much successful. As instructed by Cam at Blacktail Studios, always use brush to work on the edge as well to make sure that no bubbles are left behind, so that's what you see me doing here. After about 24 hours the epoxy was already quite sticky, which made me happy because it meant that my mixing probably worked. Getting this table out from the mold was quite easy. As mentioned, watch the other video where it didn't go so well. I still needed to use whatever tools I found, hammer, chisel, screwdrivers, but it came out okay because, as mentioned, if you watch the other video you can see the maybe one of the worst case scenarios you can have. But continuing the trend on this video of already dropping 2 extra things to my epoxy bucket, wait for it, and there it goes. It was heavier and more slippery than I thought, but it is cold outside, so I'm using warmer gloves, which don't provide a very good grip. For flattening I'm using a very simple jig. I actually took the idea for this jig from John Malecki's videos, so strong recommendation on watching his channel as well. As mentioned, at this time of the build I didn't have a workshop, and I live in a suburb kind of a neighborhood, and I was working on this quite late in the evening because woodworking is not my full-time job. So I'm sure that the families around me loved this noise coming from the router and all the sanding and everything. No one ever complained, but as mentioned, nowadays I do have a proper workshop, so they don't need to suffer anymore. I'm using a cheap router and cheap router bits as well, and I made the mistake of taking too much material at one go, so there was quite a few chip outs that I needed to fix, which I will do on the next part of this video. But nowadays I know better. I actually have a better router and bits as well, but I think it's very important not to take too much material at once, so I learned it the hard way. For fixing the small chip outs and holes, I was just using a CA glue and activator. Pretty standard process, but it works well. It takes a while, and sometimes after sanding you see the holes reappearing, but eventually I was able to get rid of all of them. At some point I think I will buy a proper light, because using the mobile phone light it kind of works, but I think a more powerful light would actually be much better. And I probably need to learn to use the camera as well. So here you can actually see me focused on the activator can. Then it was time for sanding, and as I mentioned on my other videos as well, I'm probably the exception who actually likes sanding, because I really like it, because that's the phase when you actually start to see how the end result will look like. I also had some bigger areas to fix, so I used the sawdust and wood glue trick for it. On this you can also see the quality of the walnut slab I had. The reason it was cheap was because it had water damage, but it turned out okay after all the stuff I did with it. Then I applied the self-made wood filler into the problem areas I had, and then did the final finishing touches on the epoxy with CA glue, and then it was time for starting with the finishing. After sanding to 180 grit, I applied Rubio monocoat. I've never really used any other finish, but I really like Rubio monocoat. It's very easy to apply for a noob like me. Just spread it, wait for a while, and then take everything off that you can with the cloth. Having said that, I have had a few issues with Rubio, as you can see from the white version of this table and the video for it, where something happened and I had a problem with the edge, but nowadays I just apply it slightly differently and haven't had any problems since. So something I have learned very early on is to apply this nano coating or carbon ceramic coating on the tables. I really like the extra protection it gives. For this I used carbon method. Nowadays I use N3 by Blacktail Studios, which wasn't available for international shipping while filming this video. Nowadays they do ship to Finland as well. So if you want to see how it is properly applied, I would recommend watching Blacktail Studios videos about it. What you see me doing here is just timing the 60 to 90 second periods between the coats and different phases of application. And it takes basically 2 days to finish a table, because the first day you can do the hard coat and on the second day you can do the top coat layers. For this table I just used a quick and dirty way and screwed the pin legs directly to the table. I know you shouldn't do it. Nowadays I do use threaded inserts and a more professional way of attaching legs to the table. From bottom of this table you can see that I had a few issues with it, and I didn't get all the epoxy out as the slabs and or mold weren't level or clamped properly, but this is a side that no one ever sees, except maybe my 2 viewers on YouTube. I still use this table, but I will eventually build a better coffee table with proper legs, built for future. With that, thanks for watching and please subscribe. I do have quite a few build videos coming up in future, and some of the builds are getting more advanced as I learn the tricks.